Rejoice! Rishi Sunak pushes back on net zero madness. And we called it, folks, on last Saturday's Big Opinion. Why is the motor car such an affront to the authoritarians who now govern us? Well, because it represents individual autonomy, freedom of movement. It represents fun. And none of that will wash in the brave new world of climate communism. Which is why it's so disappointing that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has decided to stick to the bonkers target of banning the sale of new petrol and diesel engine cars by 2030. Driving a car isn't a privilege, it's a human right. This policy to scrap diesel and petrol vehicles by 2030 is a car crash in slow motion for Rishi Sunak. Well, I'm delighted to see that the Prime Minister is such a fervent viewer of the show. At last, we now have a government and an opposition, and voters have a choice. The idea that the country is run by a uni-party and that Labour and the Tories are basically the same is now dead in the water, alongside the blind push for net zero. As with the honouring of Brexit, so a more cautious approach to net zero is a victory for people power. Yes, you know, those pesky voters who used to have a say in how the country was actually run. The push for net zero doesn't feel homegrown. It feels global, a bit like the COVID response. It's the brainchild of the corporate, academic and political elite, for whom Keir Starmer has such affection. These high-minded autocrats all meet once a year in Davos. Billionaires and frontline politicians, people like Bill Gates and Tony Blair, deciding what life is going to be like for you and me, the great unwashed, in the years to come. And don't forget, when asked which he prefers, Westminster or Davos, Starmer chose Switzerland, not the UK. Just as he wants to get back into bed with the EU, kissing Emmanuel Macron's arse in Paris this week, so I fear Starmer will surrender our fate as a nation to the likes of World Economic Forum chief Klaus Schwab and his mates. I've long been pushing for something I'm calling smart net zero, in which we get emissions down and pursue green alternatives, but with evidence-based science, the economy and the support of the public at the forefront. And this seems to be the path that Sunak is taking. Clean energy has economic potential and can generate jobs. But it's hard to ignore Germany's doomed green experiment led by the disastrous Angela Merkel, in which they invested tens of billions in renewables over the last 10 years, only to find themselves reliant on Vladimir Putin's oil and gas to power their industries. Hilariously, Germany is now reopening coal mines, coal being the dirtiest fuel you can find. And just as the usual suspects in the media and politics scream about Sunak's U-turn, delaying this ban on diesel and petrol cars, well, let me tell you, this is a policy already in place in their beloved EU. This latest unexpected plot twist from Sunak is a nightmare for Labour, who have said that they will reverse this decision and reinstate the ban on petrol and diesel cars by 2030, as well as scrapping new gas boilers and bullying landlords into making their rental properties more eco-friendly, costs that will inevitably be passed on to renters who are already struggling. Plus, Keir Starmer, who wants to create a 1970s-style energy company, gambling taxpayers' billions on flaky renewables, is a victim of the net zero Kool-Aid. With this bold move, there's every chance that Rishi Sunak will win back those voters in the Red Wall and beyond, who don't want themselves or the country to be made poorer in the face of this top-down, unprecedented eco-experiment. And by ruling out taxes on meat and flights and ending the war on motorists, Sunak has finally found his political voice. Sensible eco-policies the country can afford and that make sense, as well as progress on stopping the boats, could buy him another 5 years in number 10, something unimaginable just a few weeks ago. Pushing back on the extremes of net zero could be Sunak's Falklands moment, his get Brexit done moment. This sensible move on cars takes Sunak up a gear and puts him back in the political driving seat. It could ultimately see Sunak overtake Labour and leave Keir Starmer floundering in the pit lane.